A shovel lies before me, or rather, what's left of it after 3 weeks of campaigning in Germania. The blade is dull, the handle cracked at the base, and the iron bent where I struck a root with full force. The blacksmith will fix it tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, I'll be digging again. My name is Gaius Valerius Rufus. I am a legionary of the 5th Macedonian Legion. And before you start thinking about battles, about Pila, about the Testudo formation, I'll tell you the most important thing. The most important thing in a legionary's life isn't the sword. It's the shovel. These aren't just pretty words. It's simple math. In 22 years of service, I've participated in 31 battles. 31 times I stood in formation, threw my pilum, thrust my gladius, and yelled with everyone else. But I've built a camp over 2,000 times. 2,000 times. You do the math and decide what's more important. I'll tell you how it works from the inside. I warn you right away. This isn't the story of Rome you're expecting. No triumphs, no eagles over the Capitol, no speeches by Cicero. Here, there will be dirt under your fingernails, calluses on your palms, and the smell of burning wood every evening. The very underside that sculptors don't carve into columns. Let's start with something outsiders never understand. When the column halts, it doesn't mean the day is over. It means the second shift begins. You've marched 20 kilometers with 30 kilograms on your back. Your legs ache, your shoulders burn, and all you want to do is collapse and not move until morning. And then the commander yells, "Form up for work." And you form up, because there's no choice. Because if you don't build a camp, you'll be butchered in your sleeping bag tonight. You don't understand this immediately. For the first few weeks of service, you absolutely despise those evening hours, gritting your teeth in anger. Then one day, you see what happens to those who neglect the fortifications. You see it once, and you stop hating. You just dig. While the column is still marching down the road, the mensors are already at work ahead. These are military surveyors, a separate caste, people with tools and the authority to indicate where to dig. They go ahead an hour or an hour and a half, and by the time we arrive, the field is already marked out. The main street, the Via Principalis, runs north-south. The cross street, the Via Praetoria, runs east-west. At their intersection is the Praetorium, the commander's quarters. Everything else radiates from these two lines like ribs from a spine. I remember old Titus Labienus, not the famous one, just a namesake, a centurion from our cohort, explaining this to the recruits. He'd say, "Remember this once and for all? The camp is always the same. In Germania and in Egypt, in the mountains and on the plains, in rain and in heat. Wake up in the middle of the night, not knowing where you are. Get up, go straight, hit the Via Principalis, turn right. There's headquarters. Turn left. There's the hospital. It's not about convenience. It's about survival. In darkness and panic, a man doesn't think. He goes where his feet know." He was right. I verified it personally. In Dacia, when the sentries suddenly cried out in the night and the whole camp rose in darkness, I reached my place in formation before I was fully awake. My feet knew the way themselves. 2,000 identical camps had done their job. Now, about exactly how we built them, and why it was harder than it seems. The vanguard immediately took up defensive positions along the perimeter, weapons in hand, facing outwards. While these men stood guard, the rest dug. No one began work without protection. This was an ironclad rule, never broken. Because an army with shovels instead of swords isn't an army. It's a mob of diggers that can be slaughtered. First came the ditch. The fossa. Usually it was 1.2 meters, about 4 feet deep, and 3 meters, about 10 feet wide, V-shaped in cross-section. Why V-shaped and not rectangular? Rectangular is easier to dig. V-shaped is smarter. A person who falls into a V-shaped ditch gets stuck in it like a trap. The narrow bottom prevents standing upright, the walls crumble underfoot, and escaping quickly is impossible. While he thrashes around, a legionary on the rampart calmly finishes him off. Behind the ditch was the rampart. The agar. The earth from the ditch wasn't thrown away. It was piled up inside, forming an embankment. On the crest of the rampart, a palisade of sharpened stakes, the vallum, was erected. And this is where I want to tell you something separately. Because this is the part of the story that isn't usually told. Every legionary carried 2 or 3 sharpened stakes with him. This was part of his personal equipment, as mandatory as his sword. These were called vali, stakes. When Vegetius wrote about the Roman army, he particularly emphasized this detail. A soldier must not only be able to fight, but also to build. The stakes that a legionary dragged all day became the wall he slept behind by evening. But what Vegetius didn't describe in detail were the clever tricks that turned a camp from a merely fortified place into a veritable trap. In front of the ditch, in a strip 10 to 15 meters, about 30 to 50 feet wide, the engineers would set up what we privately called wolf pits, scrobus. These were small pits, arranged in a checkerboard pattern covered with branches and turf. At the center of each was a sharpened stake. From the outside, nothing was visible. At night, the enemy would attack, unaware of the terrain, in darkness, and suddenly the first ranks would fall in, screaming, creating a pileup. The attack would break down even before reaching the ditch. That's not all. Along the approaches to the camp, we sometimes drove iron stakes into the ground, tribulae. Small, 4-pronged, cunningly forged, so that no matter how they were thrown, one sharp point always faced upwards. Scatter them in the grass, and a night attack barefoot or in soft sandals became agony. Horses shied away from them so much that a cavalry charge would break up on its own. In wooded areas, we worked differently. Trees weren't completely cut down. They were undercut just enough to fall outwards from the camp with a slight push. This created an abatis, impassable quickly. And within the abatis, more stakes, more pits, layers of defense, one after another. I once asked our optio, Marcus, a smart man who had read both Polybius and Caesar, why all this, if the enemy could just go around? He looked at me as if I were a child and said, "An enemy who goes around is an enemy who loses time, and time at night is everything." While he's searching for an undefended section, we're already standing in formation, waiting. Construction took 3 to 4 hours under normal conditions. What normal conditions meant was a whole different story. Normal conditions were when the ground was soft, there were no rocks, no rain, and no enemy pressure on the perimeter. Such conditions almost never occurred. In Germania, we dug through roots. The Dolabra struck the ground with sounds as if the earth itself was resisting. In a single evening, we could break 3 pickaxes. Tools dulled instantly. Blacksmiths worked non-stop right in the camp, all night long, because tomorrow, we'd be digging again. In Dacia, we once built a camp in a rocky gorge. Digging a proper ditch was impossible. It was solid rock. Then the engineers came up with a solution. The stones they pried from the earth were laid into a dry stone wall. No mortar, no tools, just stone upon stone, carefully chosen. By morning, the wall held firm. I touched it with my hands. It swayed but didn't fall. In Egypt, there was a different problem. Sand. Dig a pit in sand, and it collapses back faster than you can dig. There, they devised lining the ditch walls with planks from baggage carts. Carts were partially dismantled, their planks put to use. The quartermasters liked this about as much as legionaries liked digging after a 20-kilometer march. Now, about what it's like, from the inside. Not a diagram, not a description. Just what you feel when you do it for the 1,000th time. You walk to your section automatically now. You know Secundus will be digging to your left, Flavius to your right. You know Flavius will complain for the first half hour, then shut up and work well. You know young Aulus from the neighboring century will try to skimp on depth again, pretending to dig while just standing and looking around. You know the centurion will notice. The centurion always notices. The earth smells different in different provinces. It's a strange thing you don't think about until your 10th campaign. German soil is dark, rich, smelling of decay and wet wood. Gallic soil is heavy, clayey, clinging to the shovel in layers. Syrian soil is dry, dusty, getting into your nose and eyes. Egyptian soil is almost weightless near the river, yet stony 10 paces from the bank. You start distinguishing these smells like an old dog distinguishing tracks, and each smell means another camp, another evening with a shovel, another night behind walls that you yourself built. Here's the strangest thing about this work. You build your own defenses with your own hands, not someone else building for you. You yourself. That's why when you hear a rustle beyond the rampart at night, you know exactly how deep the ditch is, where the pit traps are, where the stakes are. You know because you dug them yourself. And that, strangely enough, is reassuring. Better than any sentry. I once saw a camp after it had been attacked at night by barbarians, a tribe from beyond the Rhine, daring and hungry. The attack was serious. Several hundred men, with shouts and torches. They charged swiftly and confidently. They had clearly scouted ahead. They knew where the camp was. But they didn't know about the pits. The first 24 fell into the scrobers, even on approach. They cried out. Those behind them began to stumble over them, pressing forward. Those who reached the ditch were hit by javelins from the rampart, from the darkness, almost point blank, because they had the torches, not us. The attack disintegrated in 20 minutes. At dawn, we counted 18 bodies before the ditch. On our side, 2 wounded, 1 lightly. 18 against 2. All because of 3 hours of evening work with a shovel. There's your answer, then, as to why we dig every evening. There's one more thing I realized late. After about 10 years of service, no sooner. Building a camp isn't just about defense. It's about discipline. It's about what the army does together every evening without exception. Rich and poor, noble and commoner. Everyone digs. The tribune digs. The centurion digs. The legatus watches and sometimes picks up a shovel himself. Not because he physically has to, but because the soldiers see it and remember. An army that builds together is an army that holds formation together. It's the same thing. Polybius understood this. Caesar understood this. The soldiers who served under Caesar in Gaul, they built camps faster than anyone because the old man demanded speed and stood by with the measuring rope himself. Once at Alesia, this isn't my story, a veteran who saw it himself told me, Caesar ordered not 1 camp, but 2 rings of fortifications built around the besieged city. One faced inwards, the second outwards to repel external relief, L. 70 kilometers, about 43 miles of ditches, ramparts, palisades, towers, traps. 70. For comparison, that's the distance from Rome to Naples. Tens of thousands of men. Several weeks of work. And when the Gallic army arrived to relieve Vercingetorix, it ran into a wall no one expected. Alesia fell. Gaul became a province, because legionaries knew how to dig. I'm not telling you this to impress anyone. I'm telling it because people who speak of the greatness of Rome usually talk about roads and aqueducts, about the Colosseum, about laws. All of that is true. But the foundation of that greatness, and I mean literally the foundation, the earth itself, was dug with shovels. Every evening. On every campaign. By every one of us. When I returned home after 22 years, my sons asked me to show them something military. I didn't pull out my gladius, not the medals that had accumulated enough to fill a small chest. I took the old Delabra that I had brought with me for some reason, and I showed them how to hold it correctly when chopping roots. They looked at me as if I were insane. Then my eldest asked, "Father, did you really fight with a shovel for 22 years? I thought for a second, and said, "Yes, mostly with a shovel." It's not the most precise answer, but it's more honest than any other.